All right, hey everyone, welcome to the 12th episode of the Creators Corner, where we hang out and have candid conversations with just amazing creators. My name is Rob Balasabas. I'm the brand evangelist here at TubeBuddy. This is a live show, so I want to thank everyone for joining us live, but also welcome to everybody that's tuning in for the replay. Today, we're going to be talking about YouTube thumbnails. Okay, so thumbnails, click-through rate, suggested videos, everything around this really important topic is going to be the topic of the day here. And so we've got our special guest, Matt Gielen, founder and CEO of a Lil Monster Media Company, as well as Monster Thumbnails, where they help brands build audiences. To date, Matt's company has helped get, I can't believe this number, but 30 billion views on YouTube. That's B as in billion. So he's written articles.
Also additional videos. Additional. That's above and beyond what they were getting.
You're hearing Matt now. So here's Matt. Yes, exactly. Additional. And so he's also written articles on TubeFilter and other popular publications that YouTubers refer to ongoing. So he is definitely a leader in this space. He speaks on big stages like VidCon, Social Media Week LA, Vid Summit, and he's actually even consulted directly for YouTube. So definitely a man that has a lot of knowledge around this space. So Matt, I'm sure I missed something. Why don't you just say hello to the audience and introduce yourself?
Sure. No, that was a fantastic intro. Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been operating on the platform for about 10 years. Most of my work has been for like major media companies or at media companies. And, as you stated in TubeFilter, generally speaking, we help people with YouTube channels build their audiences on the platform in a variety of ways. Kind of the main way we do it is essentially looking at the data and helping them analyze what their audience is most interested in. And we refer to that as like programming strategy. And out of programming strategy flows things like what their thumbnail strategy is and what they look like, and testing thumbnails and testing different ways to present a value proposition to the audience that makes them excited about clicking on the video, and then helping creators keep people watching the video by, analyzing things like retention curves and finding where people are dropping off and where people are rewinding and watching more, and kind of what's driving that audience so they can do more of what the audience wants and less of what the audience is indicating they don't want.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I mean, this is great. Really excited to have you here. Super honored that you're, I know you're super busy. You've got a huge team, and you've got this new IP now, Monster Thumbnails. And so let's talk about thumbnails. But before we do that, let's kind of set the stage, Matt. Get some of the jargon out of the way before we jumping into designing thumbnails and higher click-through rates. Can you explain first what is a CTR? Because we're going to be referring to that quite a fair bit.
Sure. My favorite subject. So essentially, click-through rate is the number of clicks your video gets divided by the number of impressions that YouTube gives that video on the platform, be it in browse, suggested, search, and then like a handful of other really smaller ones. But those are the main three, right? That's kind of the easy answer, or the simple answer. That's what your click-through rate is, right? But the follow-up question to that is like, well, what's a good click-through rate? And that's a much more difficult question to answer, because a click-through rate is relative to the volume of impressions that it is getting. It's also relative to all of your thumbnails and videos, impressions it's gotten before, your channel has gotten before, but it's also relative to what everyone else is getting, right? So like if you did a video, and I feel like I may have started the number of people using woodworking as an example. I don't think any of us have any idea about woodworking at all, because like I've seen a couple of different like YouTube strategists mention woodworking recently, and I was like, oh God, did I start this 2 or 3 years ago on stage when I couldn't think of an example and woodworking sprang into my head? But anyways, let's say you make a video on how to bake a white chocolate macadamia nut cookie, right? And you put this video up. That video is a good click-through rate for that video is relative to every other video about how to make a white chocolate macadamia nut cookie, right? It's also relative to your own videos, right? Because YouTube operates very similarly to the Facebook feed in terms of determining how many impressions a video is going to get. Now, it operates very differently than Facebook in a whole bunch of other ways, but when a video first goes up, YouTube sends that video, generally speaking, to your most active and engaged fans, or puts it in their browse feed, or puts it in suggested. But it doesn't send it to everyone right away, notifications aside. It sends it to a sample, right? And then it uses the data from that sample to determine who else to serve that to within your audience. The people who have watched one of your videos in the past being the most likely to be served that video the next time they land on YouTube, right? Or if they're in the middle of a YouTube session and suggested and so on, right? And if it does really well with those people, right? Well, then YouTube could potentially begin serving that to people who have never, ever watched one of your videos before. And that's how they expand your audience. Now, what's happening throughout this process is, generally speaking, assuming you're a baking channel, and let's say that baking channel specializes in just making different types of cookies, right? Your click-through rate when that video goes out is going to be very high, because those are your most hardcore supporters, right? Those are the people that are most interested in your content, that click on every video, so on and so forth. But over time, YouTube reaches less and less engaged audience, people that are less and less familiar with your brand, right? And that click-through rate goes down, right? And this happens in the span of 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, right? And then it'll settle in, and then maybe on day 2 it goes up a little bit or stays low, and then day 3 it goes up, and 4, and so on and so forth, as YouTube kind of zeroes in on the exact audience that wants to watch your content, right? So yes, click-through rate from a simple perspective, clicks divided by impressions. Click-through rate from a more theoretical perspective is a whole bunch of factors, and it's really all relative. Generally speaking, higher is always better.
Got it. Okay, so I think that's so that actually is a good transition into a question here. So somebody says that my click-through rate is fairly high at the release of the video, then steeply declines in the days after. Is that sort of what you're referring to? Like it goes to...
That's exactly what I was referring to, right? So when you put a video out, it's reaching that core engaged audience, people who watch every video, people who are likely to click on it the moment they see it, right? And then over time, right, YouTube reaches less and less of those people, and more people that maybe didn't watch the last one, or maybe did watch the last one but didn't watch the 2 before that, right? People who are just not quite as active and engaged in your audience. And it's also beginning to reach people who've never watched one of your videos before, right? So if you walk into a grocery aisle, right, and you say, because you're from the 1950s, I really want a cola, right? But there's no Coke and there's no Pepsi, right? But there's a bunch of these other brands. You might be like, I don't know, this one maybe, but like if you see Coca-Cola, you're like, oh, got it, right?
Right.
And so those audiences who haven't been exposed to your brand before become less likely to click, and thus your click-through rate lowers. A low click-through rate isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've seen videos that are getting 1 million views a day with a 1% click-through rate, because YouTube's just putting this in front of everybody, saying everybody should watch this, right? Because they know it provides satisfaction to the people who do click on it. And what they've seen in their data is that the vast majority of audiences that click on it like it.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, so I think that's also another segue, really good segue to, I think there's a video where you put out where you talk about the difference between optimizing your thumbnail for browse versus suggested. Can you touch on what the difference would be? What's the different approach between the two?
Sure. So the difference between browse and suggested is basically thumbnail size, right? Now, there have been some experiments that people have seen and talked about recently of making suggested thumbnails larger, right? But by and large, right, about 50% of the YouTube audience is watching content on mobile. And no matter where you are in mobile, be it a browser or an app, suggested thumbnails are generally really small. However, browse is usually quite big, right? It's taken up 1/3 to half the screen at this point, right? It's pretty large. And so within that context, right, when your video first comes out, having it be a little bit heavier on text, right, is probably a-okay from a click-through rate perspective. But when that thumbnail gets real small and suggested, you probably want to winnow down the amount of text that's being used on that thumbnail, because it becomes much less likely that someone's able to read it. I think what we were referencing in the video, or talking about in the video that you're referencing, was the difference between your audience and a new audience, right? So when I first put a video out on Little Monster, it's going out to people who mostly have seen our videos, right? And so if people see my face in it, right, they're more likely to go, that's a Little Monster video, right? And I like Little Monster, I like Matt, so let me click on it, right? Versus 2-3 days later, when that video might be shown to audiences who maybe only watched one of our videos or have maybe only watched a TubeBuddy video or a Creator Insider video, right? And aren't familiar with Little Monster, them seeing my face is the same thing as walking into that cola aisle and not seeing Coke or Pepsi, right? You're just like, nah, yeah, another white guy talking to you. No, thank you, right? So they don't click on it. But if instead I remove my face from that thumbnail, right? And specifically, we're talking about the YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki 60 Minutes interview.
60 Minutes,
right?
yeah.
See, my face isn't on that thumbnail anymore. It was when I first put it out, but I removed it on, I think, day 2 or day 3, because I know people that are being served this video at that point have little familiarity with me, but are going to be way more familiar with Susan in 60 Minutes, right? And so it's a difference between creating a value proposition for your audience and creating a value proposition for the wider audience that might be interested in the topic of that video.
Gotcha. No, this is really good. I think it's, I've always kind of wondered whether or not having a face on your thumbnail is better than not having a face. Like, let's say you're creating a video on, LinkedIn best practices, speaking for myself, LinkedIn best practices. Would you just use, LinkedIn icons and sort of like screenshot of something that is, sort of compelling, that makes them kind of question, what is that they're talking about? Or is it smart to always have a face that people can recognize so that your subscribers can start sort of putting your face as the brand, I suppose?
I would say it really kind of depends on your channel and the brand of your channel. Generally speaking, for you, I would definitely recommend that you do include your face at the very least for the first 48 hours, right? Because your audience knows you, right? And seeing that it's your face on there is going to be more credible than just the text on the screen, right? They'll have, they just look at the thumbnail, right? And they don't look at the channel name, which is usually kind of hard to read. They're not necessarily going to know that it's coming from you, right? So allowing for that brand familiarity through having your face in there, I would definitely recommend. As you move into day 3 and beyond, what I would say is kind of generally what I would always say, which is test it out. Right? If you find that the LinkedIn logo works better than the LinkedIn logo on your face or whatever else on the face, right? Then use that. Now, the one thing I would say be mindful of is that you might get a short-term increase in click-through, but you're going to want to pay attention to the change in average view duration, right? Because if people click on it and then go, nah, I don't like this guy, right? For whatever reason, then click away, right? That'll bring your average view duration down, which will mean that your click-through rate, it doesn't matter too much because YouTube stops serving it to people because it's dissatisfying. Like, the one thing you never want to do is like mislead people with your title and thumbnail, because that's the quickest way to plummeting average view durations and to have that video get less and less promotion throughout YouTube, because YouTube keys on those metrics and says, this video is not satisfying the people that clicked on it.
Gotcha. Okay, so that is also important. I mean, there's the whole clickbait situation that you want to get into. Okay, so I've got some more questions here, and I want to invite everybody that's on the live as well. Ask your questions. This is a really good time to ask your questions around thumbnails, best practices. I think Matt is down to take a look at a couple examples as well. So let me know in the comments what questions you have, and if you want us to take a look at a couple examples of your own thumbnails, totally down to do that. Before we keep going though, Matt, can you just share the service that you have around thumbnails?
Sure. So I was at Vid Summit, hanging out with a bunch of extremely well-respected people in the space, just talking shop. And inevitably, the conversation turned to thumbnails, right? Because, if you've been in this industry for any amount of time, just the incredible importance of a good thumbnail, right? And yes, it's important from a click-through rate perspective and all the metrics perspective and everything. But if we think about it within the context of like movies, right? when they premiere a big movie, right, they spend just as much on the marketing and promotion of that movie as they do the movie themselves, right?
Mhm.
And on YouTube, what do we have to market and promote our videos? Title and our thumbnail, right?
That's right.
So
Mhm.
when we think about the importance of it, I like to put it in that context because I think it makes people immediately be like, oh, okay. You don't even have to think of anything algorithmic, right? You don't have to think of any of that to completely get the importance of them. So anyways, we were talking about thumbnails, and someone said, yeah, it's amazing that no one's really started a service to make thumbnails for creators, given how important they were, right? And so at that point, I said, excuse me, I have to go. And began the mission of starting Monster Thumbnails. And the idea behind Monster Thumbnails is very, very straightforward. We help creators, media companies, anybody who wants to make better thumbnails more consistently, that is coming from an organization that thinks about nothing more than how to increase performance on the YouTube platform from a holistic perspective. And so when we create thumbnails within Monster Thumbnails, we actually request that people send us an unlisted video link or just a private video link on someplace other than YouTube, so that we can actually go through the video, understand what the value proposition is of the video, and take kind of all the corresponding screenshots if we need to take screenshots, but so that we understand what the value is, right? Because like there's a lot of places that can slap a face and some words, right, on a thumbnail and do some gradient, right, and maybe a drop shadow, right? There's not a lot of places that are going to analyze a video, understand what the core value proposition of that video is, and then turn that into a marketing message as seen through your thumbnail. I should say, as you highlight a thumbnail on that page for a Little Monster video, I create all of the thumbnails for the Little Monster YouTube channel. Please take that off the screen, Rob, please. I create all those thumbnails in no small part because I like getting my hands dirty. I like building, I like understanding, I like knowing what goes into things. And I often have like 10 versions of a thumbnail for each video, which is insane and obsessive and compulsive. But I want to know what it's like to be a creator, because more and more Little Monster is working with creators. I mean, in the past, the majority of our clients have always been media companies. More and more professional creators and semi-professional creators are reaching out to us and wanting to work with us. And so I want to know what it's like. So I create all of those thumbnails. I am not a graphic designer. I do the best I can. But all of the Monster thumbnails are created by a graphic designer who's worked with us for a long time, that we've trained in YouTube best practices. And we're really, really proud of the work that's being done and coming out of Monster Thumbnails. Did we lose you, Rob? Am I here on my own?
Lost me.
There we go.
There we go. Not leaving you hanging. So yeah, we'll share the link to Monster Thumbnails. It's literally monsterthumbnails.com. So go check that out. But yeah, that's awesome. I think it's a great story. I think a lot of people are really not looking at thumbnails as closely as they should. So it's good that you are there to help them with that. Okay, I'm going to jump into some questions here in the comments. There's lots of comments happening. Want to say hey to the Orlando guy. Hey, how's it going? He was on TubeBuddy 101 with me this morning. Got a good question here from Gord, good friend of mine. He says, should a given playlist have a consistent thumbnail style across all the thumbnails, or should the thumbnails be a mix of styles inside a playlist? It's a good question. Your thoughts, Matt?
This is a good question. Generally speaking, I wouldn't overthink it from a thumbnail perspective. The best YouTube channels that I have seen that perform the best, there's some exceptions, but generally speaking, they don't have a single template that they use every time, right? Every thumbnail is on a theme, but everyone also feels unique and different. So, you know, a great example of this would be Mr. Beast, right? If you look at Mr. Beast thumbnails, every single one is different. Now, some of them have similar themes, right? Like you know, I think he's done a few different "we spent 24 hours" kind of thing, and they all kind of look similar, but they're not the same, right? And so if I think about that from like a playlist perspective, I don't think it's imperative unless it's something like Algebra 101 on a channel that's all about math lessons for like 5th to 10th grade, right? Well, then, yeah, I mean, it probably makes sense for them to be pretty similar. But I think it's really depends on the greater context.
Gotcha. Yeah, that really helps. So, Gord, let us know if that answers your question. I'm just pulling up Mr. Beast's channel here, and but yeah, that's a really good point. I do see, I think a lot of channels, they sort of have like a consistent look, but they're not all the same. That makes sense. Like they have some, elements that are, sort of similar, but yeah, here's Mr. Beast's, channel. Really curious, Matt, what do you think about text? There's some channels that have like, huge subscriber numbers that have zero text. It's just like a nice picture. I think one is Peter McKinnon, for example. He rarely uses text on his thumbnails. And then there's some that, they never leave text out. So what's your thoughts on text inside thumbnails?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think it depends on the brand and what you're trying to establish and what the property is. That said, generally speaking, we try to go with less is more, right? We try to stick to no more than 2 to 3 words because it's just very difficult for anyone to read more than that, especially when the thumbnail is small, right? We always try to design the text for when the thumbnail is small, so it's readable even then. But I think the more interesting philosophical complex idea that I've been toying with a lot lately is the difference in text in your thumbnail versus the title, right? So when you have a thumbnail that has text in it, you don't want to just repeat the title, right? But beyond that, you don't want to have a value proposition in your thumbnail and a value proposition in your title, right? For example, if we had a thumbnail Little Monster that said, increase CTR, and then in the title we did 6 tips to get more views, right? People would be like, wait a minute, those are 2 different value propositions that you're telling me this video is about, right? And that causes cognitive dissonance, and from what we've seen, causes people to be less likely to click, right? Same thing as if I said 6 strategies to increase CTR in the thumbnail and 6 strategies to increase CTR in the title. There's no reason to like duplicate that, right? What we have seen a lot of success with is a combination of value prop, info gap, and tease. So value proposition is you're going to get this out of the video. A information gap is it causes the viewer to create a question in their head, right? And they can only answer that question by clicking on your video. And then a tease is like a spicy bit, right? Where it's not really a value proposition, it's not really an information gap, but it makes you go, ooh, right? So what something like that might look like is this, not this, right? So that's a tease. Wait, you're like, huh? This, what's not this? What should I do? There's a check and an X, right? It's there at the top, right? And then in the title is a very clear value proposition, right? So the text in the thumbnail gets someone to read the title, which gets them to be more likely to click, right? And playing with a combination of value prop, information gap, and tease, right? But not duplicating them across your title and thumbnail, right? Or thumbnail and title. I think Mr. Beast, again, does a fantastic job of this, right? Like if you look at his holding your hand on the ship or last one to remove their hand from the ship video, whatever it is, right? It's got all the guys holding their hands on the ship, right? And it says day 2, right? What this is teasing the fact that there's going to be multiple days of people trying to hold their hand on this ship to win the ship, right? And the title says something like last to take their hand off, wins the ship, right? Which is a very clear value proposition from a title perspective, but a tease from the thumbnail perspective, right? So I think there's a lot of playing with that in titles and thumbnails that a channel could do to increase their click-through rate and increase their viewership. And that's how I would think about text, right? The way I would think about it is going like, okay, If my title is very straightforward value proposition, then I want to use an information gap or a tease in my thumbnail, right? If my title is an information gap, right, where it's something like, Vsauce does it all the time, where it's like, what does human taste like, right? Well, that's an information gap title. You'll go, I have no idea, right? But in the thumbnail, you don't really want to put that, right? In the thumbnail, you want to tease something, right? You want to be like, ham, question mark, right? And people will be like, ham, and then read the title and be like, what? Humans taste like ham? I got to find out, right? And they'll click in there. So that's the way I would think about text.
That's a really good way to look at it. You're basically, it's not just, it is, I think the point here is that you're not really just, it's not just all in the thumbnail that gets people to click. It is also really important to have the subject or the title to work with your thumbnail. I like how you put that. That really makes a lot of sense. Never thought of it that the thumbnail more or less directs people to the title, and then they'll, and then they'll look at clicking into the video.
Because all of that, title, thumbnail, value proposition, all that sort of stuff, just completely derives from your programming choice, right? Mm-hmm. Your click-through rate starts when you choose to make a video about something, right? If you're a channel that focuses on math lessons and you decide to make a video about baking cupcakes, right? You made a poor programming choice. So no matter how good your thumbnail, no matter how good your title is, right, your audience is going to say, like, we signed up for math lessons. Why are you trying to teach me how to make cupcakes? I'm not clicking on that because I'm not interested in that, right? Right. That's at a macro level. At like a very closer in, like micro level, like imagine if you're a YouTube channel and you teach people how to succeed on YouTube, right? And then you say, I really want to do something about Facebook, right? Now you might think like the people that are watching me are growth hackers, right? They're interested in this sort of stuff. I've got something really interesting to say about Facebook, right? Well, that might be true, right? You might hit 66% of your audience that has that interest, but you're missing 33%, right? And you have no idea who ham, awesome. You have no idea who YouTube is going to put that video in front of, right? Right. Even if it's evenly distributed, that still means that 33% of your audience has no chance whatsoever of clicking on that video, right? So you have to be real strategic. And same thing with just if you were making a YouTube video, right? Like we made videos early on that were like, what beauty haul channels can learn from Jeffree Star. It's a really good video. But what I didn't think about from a packaging and framing perspective was like, my audience is only about 10%, 15% female, right? Now, not to like gender discriminate, but I would say generally speaking, males are going to be less interested in how to make a beauty or a haul channel than females. Right. That's just on the demographic side. Regardless, let's say my audience was 100% female. If my channel's been about how to build a YouTube audience, right, I'm still just going to hit a small segment that's specifically interested in how to build a makeup and beauty haul channel, right? So we did a video recently, very similar to the Jeffree Star video, that focused on the odd ones out, right? But I didn't say anything about odd ones out in the title, right? And even from a thumbnail perspective, like, yes, I put the odd ones out in the thumbnail, but my text was all about the, if I'm not mistaken, the value proposition of the video, right? And my title was how to expand your audience, because I use odd ones out as an example of how to appeal to a very broad audience on YouTube, and how you can succeed by doing that and what their strategies are. So like ostensibly I could have said, the odd ones out secret to success, right? Or how animation channels can thrive on YouTube. But I would be really narrowing down the amount of audience that I would say this is applicable to, even though it's applicable to everyone who's interested in the things that we normally talk about, which is audience development on YouTube, the video as a whole. So a lot of like just your packaging and marketing of your video, right, can be addressed to speak to your entire audience as opposed to just a specific segment of it, right? And that's why programming choice has such a dramatic impact on click-through rate.
I love that. I love that. And thanks everybody that's, liking and sharing this. I mean, I think Matt is delivering massive value here today, really talking about thumbnails and really picking it apart. There's a lot of questions in here. And so I'm just going to go through this. I'm going to scratch my questions. I'm just going to go through with the audience questions here. So one is emojis. So use of emojis, arrows, graphics like that. Is that something that I see that you guys use it on your channel every now and then? You find that that's important?
I think arrows and circles are good at times and can help click-through rate. I think it depends on the channel and what the background of the thumbnail is, right? Like I found myself sometimes just using an arrow for no particular reason. Like,
pointing at a random thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't really help. But when it's like, I saw one thumbnail or in one of our thumbnail videos, it's a iPhone giveaway, and in the thumbnail the guy's handing iPhones to someone, but he put a big red circle around it because if he hadn't, it would just look like two people kind of standing off in the distance, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, those are the iPhones that he's giving away or whatever, right? Or at the very least you see that red circle and you're like, what is he highlighting, right? And then you read the title and you go, oh, he's highlighting iPhones that he's giving away. Well, that sounds interesting, right? Emojis is interesting. Generally, we recommend against it because it does seem to be something that YouTube keys on to determine like spam. That said, I'm for an American, I'm a soccer fanatic, which means I occasionally will watch a professional game over in England and watch a lot of U.S. men's national team and the women's national team, which is head and shoulders above the men's national team. But anyway, so occasionally I'll be served like soccer highlight videos in Browse and that kind of thing. And I tend to see some emojis there, right? Where I'm like, really, you're crying, laughing over this amazing kick. But anyway, we've never seen it be any more, any less successful in kids. So I would say if it's part of your brand, try it out. But with everything else, experiment, determine what the click-through rate is, determine whether that increase or decrease average view duration, and then make decisions there going forward, which is a good time to add that from a YouTube audience development perspective, and I'm not a creator by trade, right? I'm not a creative for sure. But the way I look at each new YouTube upload is it's just another data point, right? So the idea that you're ever just going to be set and be like, that's the way it is, right? Is just not a thing on YouTube anymore. I mean, look, the candidate generation filter within the algorithm, and this was in a paper that Google put out 2 years ago. So forgive the generalization of the recommendation systems as having a candidate generation filter. But what they said was that filter essentially refreshes every 5 hours, which basically means there's a new YouTube algorithm every 5 hours at a minimum, right? Wow. So every new video is a new data point to determine what your audience is into and what's causing the algorithm to say that these videos provide satisfaction to a user.
Yeah, I mean, it's always changing. That's the thing about YouTube. There's Daniel Batal, one of our partners and one of our good friends here as well, did a thing about, does YouTube hate small creators? And he made this point exactly. It's always changing. It's a fair space, right? Even if you're just starting out. So, okay, awesome. Let me just go through here and take on a couple more questions. Matt, thanks so much. We've already gone over half an hour here. So give me a couple more questions. Sure. And okay, let's see here. Question about colors. Are there any specific colors? I know sort of in the design and branding world, there are colors that, get attention, blue, reds, the Remaxes of the world. That's why they use blue and reds and things like that. Do you have any thoughts, any tips around colors for thumbnails?
Yeah. So kind of first and foremost, we have 3 cones in our eyes, right? Red, green, and blue. And that makes up all the colors that we see. They hit those cones and that determines what we're seeing. So what we found is that red, green, and yellow, generally speaking, generate the most click-through rate. And the reason why is that the red and green wavelengths stand out to us quite a bit. The yellow wavelength hits both cones and makes it stand out even more. And so generally speaking, those are good places to hunt for colors in terms of like what you make your primary color. In terms of like if you're going for a background or a text color or something else, it stands out. Now, people tend to see red a little bit different digitally, like it doesn't pop as much. I have heard. I'm not sure if there's a study being quoted or not there. But for some reason doesn't show up great digitally. So that might be one that you want to play a little bit safe on. The other thing I would say about red, and this is absolutely no knock to TubeBuddy, I love TubeBuddy, but if you look at the digital video space, pretty much everyone looked at the YouTube logo and was like, those colors look great. And now everybody's got red, black, and white, right? So when we launched Little Monster, when I was thinking about coming up with what the brand for this agency would be, the reason I made our primary colors green was because it's complementary to red, right? Complementary colors are colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, right? And what happens is it makes those colors stand out, right? So yellow, purple, red, green, blue, and orange. When those colors are next to each other, it makes them both pop out and stand out. So generally speaking, it's kind of what we recommend. One thing we definitely don't recommend in terms of thumbnails is any sort of white background, right? It gets washed away in kind of the primary color of YouTube, which is white, right? In terms of like browse suggested watch pages. Now, if you're in dark mode, awesome. Everything should be dark mode. But then it would be like, well, then don't use dark, don't use black, don't use dark gray, because that's going to wash into the back, right? But the vast majority of people are not using dark mode these days. So that's pretty much it. I mean, like, look, it's all fair game. Like I've seen really crappy thumbnails do extremely well because they had an amazing tease element to it and drove huge click-through rate because of the value prop in the title. That said, more consistently good thumbnails tend to lead to more consistently good viewership.
Gotcha. There you go. So this whole session really is, showing me that it's really much more of an art than it is, science. It is both, and there's no one perfect way to do thumbnails. There's so many factors and there's so many things. What I'm hearing from you is that really testing and paying attention to your audience and the numbers and the stats really help. Now, I'm curious though, when it comes to thumbnails, where does thumbnails kind of start in your mind and thinking about thumbnails? Is it before you shoot that video? Is it during, or is it after? Is it sort of an afterthought and the last step before you, upload?
Yeah, for the Little Monster YouTube channel, it's kind of concurrent, right? Where I think of a video I want to make, or I think of a topic I want to talk about, and then I begin thinking about the title and thumbnail, right? And I usually have a pretty good concept of what the thumbnail and title is going to be before I make the video. And then I sit down to make the video, and it'll alter or change sometimes quite a bit, sometimes not too much. Now, that's for a utility channel, right? Little Monster YouTube channel, like that's a straight utility channel. Like, yeah, there's probably some people that are there because occasionally I'll go on a rant, right? But I'm not entertaining. I'm not a performer, right? Like, it's just not the thing. There are a lot of channels that are, right? David Dobrik is a entertainment channel, right? And so if I'm David Dobrik, I'm probably programming my channel by saying like, okay, what's a great thumbnail and title that people will click on, and let me go make a video about that, right? Because like he'll do a video about doing elephant toothpaste, where they do the big explosion and that kind of thing, and then he'll do a video about like learning etiquette, right? So like, the topic programming part about what he does isn't the value proposition to his audience, right? Right. Like the value proposition to his audience is you're going to hang out with David Dobrik, right? Who's probably the happiest person on earth, right? I've never seen or heard someone laugh and smile as much as he does. So like, awesome, right? And his group of friends that appear to have absolutely like destroyed anything in their brain that causes fear or pain, you know, like they go for it. And so like, that's fun for people to watch. And so like, if you're an entertainment channel, then I would say like, yeah, it's probably a good place. But if I'm trying to program, you know, my channel about, you know, how to cook with, kale, right? Like I'm probably going more from like a templated approach and probably thinking more from like a programming standpoint, like what is a fresh concept that my audience is going to be interested in, but within this very specific box.
Right. Yeah, again, it depends on your channel, depends on your content, your audience. So yeah, I'm glad you answered it that way. Awesome. We're over 40 minutes. So Matt, before we start wrapping up, what is it like to work with Monster Thumbnails? Like what would we experience if we went to your website, signed up? What would that look like? Because a lot of people don't want to let go of that whole design aspect of their channel. That's very personal to them, you know? So how do you guys capture that vision from the creators out there?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two main reasons and then several other reasons why someone would hire Monster Thumbnails, right? So the first reason is they just don't know what makes a good thumbnail, right? And they've tried some things, or maybe they don't have the editing software, right? Or maybe they're just not a good graphic designer like me. I should hire Monster Thumbnails. And they want better thumbnails and they want higher click-through rates and so on and so forth. The second reason is just from like a time standpoint, right? As you know, being an independent creator and hearing from other creators, like there's a lot of creators that are like, dude, I spend 3 hours just futzing around with my thumbnail on a good day, right? And so there's a lot of people who would probably like to offload that and know that it's in really good hands with people that just spend all day thinking about and making YouTube thumbnails. So like those are the two main reasons. One, you're not very good at it, you want professionals to do it, and the other is time, right? Because like if you really love making your thumbnails and want to keep that close, like I'm not trying to sell Monster Thumbnails to that group. Great, keep doing it. But if you struggle with CTR and you don't feel like you're good at making thumbnails, or you just want to have a lot more time on your hands because you spend too much time making thumbnails, those would be the two kind of main people I'd say would be good for Monster Thumbnails. That said, to your point about wanting to keep control of their brand and keep their arms around it, with Monster Thumbnails, the way the process starts is basically as soon as you purchase a package from us, within business hours, you'll get an email from an account manager. That account manager will set up a time to speak with you. And what we do on that phone call or that Google Hangout is really establish from you the most important aspects of your brand as you see them, what you like about your thumbnails, what you don't like about your thumbnails, what you like about other people's thumbnails, and what you don't like about other people's thumbnails. So that we can incorporate that into every thumbnail that we do for you. Then we get any sort of like branding elements from you that are important, any text elements that are important for you. And we put that all together on a board that is your board that only you and us have access to, so that it's always there for our designers to call upon when they're making your thumbnails. From there, all we ask is that you drop us a link to the video that you'd like a thumbnail for into a card on this board, and then our designer gets to work. And typically we offer 1, sometimes 2 revisions to the thumbnail. Early on, we're pretty lenient with that because we want to get it right. Right? We want you to have a thumbnail that you're happy with, that you're proud of, and that does extremely well from a click-through rate perspective relative to your channel, so that you're happy with the service and you feel very confident just dropping that video in and picking up that thumbnail when it's ready, and you're ready to upload it. The idea is that this is a service that not only frees up your time that you can have confidence in, but a service that also leads to greater viewership growth, because that's the reason we created this service, right? There's a lot of freelancers out there that you can throw $5, $10 for a thumbnail to, and they'll make you something generic that kind of looks like everyone else, probably be somewhat competent. Like, fine, that's not what we do. right? What we do is we pay a tremendous amount of attention to the video, to the value proposition, because Little Monster is known for helping people build audiences, and that's what we want to do through this service as well, help you build your audience.
Awesome, Matt. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And on a personal level with TubeBuddy, we really believe in what Matt's doing. We have just signed up. I mean, basically signed up or brought on, and Matt is going to be, his team's going to be taking care of our thumbnails for the TubeBuddy channel. So we're super excited about that. We got a freeze frame of Matt smiling and laughing here.
This is an ad for LaCroix.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that sounds that's awesome. So I'm gonna put the link to your website, your channel, Monster Thumbnails, all over the comments here right after the live. We are super happy to be working with you, Matt. So thanks again for this time. If you guys have any questions, you're watching this on the replay, then head over to our channel, leave us a message, send us your questions. We are happy to answer them for you. And tune in tomorrow. We've got another special guest, Dale L. Roberts. We're going to talk about creating engaging content for your channel. All right. So thanks again for hanging out with us today. Yeah. Thanks for hanging out. Your freeze frame is still there, so just keep up the screen. But Matt, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Take it easy.
Bye, guys.